Hi, gorgeous. Welcome back to the School of Sensuality. I'm actually really, really excited, as I always am. But Jo is one of my friends, and we go quite back in time from our professional CrossFit athlete days. And we did win the Torian intermediate pairs in what was that, 2019, maybe?
Yeah,
And we have
2019.
come a long way since then. But I love
Yeah.
how the aspect of this podcast is going to go. We're going to be relating emotional eating, food, ADHD around with our body. And, we can kind of start with that, the food that we eat and how that supports our body, because we have the experience of using this around CrossFit and athletes. But, not everyone out there is an athlete. Not everyone out there is counting their calories. We just kind of want to bring food and the awareness of food into our bodies. So I know a lot of women out there do struggle with a relationship with food or emotional eating or being triggered by eating. What are some of your experiences that you've had with your relationship with food over the time?
Personal experiences.
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose I came off the bat of like quite disordered eating in my lifetime. Probably in my early 20s was probably the peak of it all, and kind of diving into my mid 20s where things would make me quite anxious. So I came from like a competitive bodybuilding background, and so very like chicken and broccoli, chicken and rice, and anything that deviated out of those food rules was like I'm a failure if I deviate from the plan, unless it was a dedicated cheat meal. So that's where it all kind of came across, and it was all to manipulate my body and what my body looks like. That was my peak of it. What I mean by the anxiety around food and my relationship with it was I felt like I couldn't trust hunger and fullness, and that I couldn't really work out, am I hungry or am I just craving something? And I had really significant cravings because naturally, if I'm eating chicken and broccoli, I'm going to want to have something different, right? My body is craving other nutrients, but also just variability in my diet. So things like if people ask me to go to a restaurant to eat out, that would make me really anxious, and I would avoid like all social situations. Counting calories is part of it, and macro counting, which I'm not against, but it's always about the intention behind it. So if counting calories and macros becomes so like all consuming that it limits you from social functioning, it limits your day-to-day life, it becomes neurotic, then it's no longer healthy, right? So it became unhealthy obsession. It'd be things like I wouldn't eat like a full apple because there'd be too many carbs in it, and I would count my almonds. So I'd max out at 10. And these were just bestowed food rules that I created. So I guess coming through that, I moved into performance-based sport, but still had that mindset attached to it. So rather than looking at training for aesthetics, which was bodybuilding, moved into CrossFit, and that was awesome for me, but I still had the mindset of like less is more in terms of food to try and fuel. And I was getting like sick and injured relatively often, and I was really afraid to eat carbs, even though that was like a preferred fuel source. Um, Moving out of that, and even just like I wouldn't have a rest day, for example, like always training, always under eating. And it didn't necessarily translate into better anything. I didn't have like a better body composition. I didn't really have like, I had brain fog all the time. I was really irritated easily. I had very little social life, like almost afraid of dating, and kind of didn't have a sex life at all, and was really, yeah, like my libido was incredibly low as well. Even when I did have a partner, it was like we barely did because I just didn't have the energy in reserve. So I guess that's kind of the extreme end of my own personal experiences, and then kind of like unfolding that was a work in progress, and it didn't happen overnight. Eating enough and then learning to trust my body to tell me when I'm hungry and when I'm full was that, again, it was a work in progress. Like it was a process that took me several years, and it's something that I continue to work on. It's not something that I just arrived at. So that's kind of my experience in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing and being so honest in actually what you went through and what you were navigating, like with the low libido and social functions. And I'm sure there's so many other women like that out there who are navigating the same. Something that you'd said is like noticing like if you were hungry or your kind of like feelings towards food, how did you, from then what you were feeling then and how you are now, how did you kind of notice a difference between like whether it was whether you were hungry or whether you were full or whether you kind of like lacking emotions or emotionally eating? How did you notice a difference?
Yeah, that's a really, really nice question. I think prior, because of years and years of dieting behavior where somebody is bestowing like when to eat and what to eat and how, like literally meals were not breakfast, lunch, dinner. It was called meal one, meal two, meal three, meal four, meal five, and what time to have that. You then lose that lack of trust in yourself to be like, I'm hungry, or I'm, or maybe I'm full, or you almost have to trick your brain into thinking that you're not hungry. So like using ways of suppressing your appetite, like, drinking lots of black coffee, like trying to drink loads of water, trying to chew gum, like just anything to like subside what might feel like hunger. And then fullness, like almost having to tell yourself that you are full and that like it's fine. And then again, using those suppressants for appetite or distraction techniques. And so that was back in the day in that height of like that real disordered eating phase. And I guess learning to trust hunger and fullness came from like little by little adding more variety in my diet and then realizing really like looking inwards and reflecting on like body awareness, right? Like being very mindful of how I was eating, like, slowing down the process, what I was eating, and then introducing things slowly, and then taking note of how that felt in my body or how I felt in my day-to-day life. So let's say, for example, like increasing the variety of vegetables and fruits would be like, oh, like I've noticed that I am getting less sick less often, or I've noticed that I've just got more like clarity in my brain, or I've introduced more carb sources and I'm gone, wow, I actually got like motivation to go and train and I don't feel like I'm so drained. So just being like really, really aware or tapped into what's happening internally, and that awareness was so helpful for me. So yeah.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah, I like how you said like the awareness, and we were just talking a little bit about this before we started the podcast. Like, and a couple of things you mentioned is like, forgetting to eat or having like that variety. And I will openly share, food has been something that I have just, I know I need to eat food. I know I need to eat my calories and I will just eat. And it's only in the past really couple of months that I've started now building a new relationship with food. And also with being in the ADHD space, I feel that I sometimes I just simply forget to eat. Like I can be so focused on doing something, I'm having such a good time, and I actually don't feel hungry. Like sometimes obviously I do feel hungry, but it's great when I have my brother or my friends living with me because they're like, Katie, have you eaten today? And I'm like, oh, I haven't. And I just get really caught up in that. So something that I've been doing recently is setting alarms on my phone to make sure like, okay, that alarm goes off. Yes, I can finish what I'm doing because my ADHD brain likes to finish that whatever I'm in the process of. And then, okay, now it's time to go and eat. But I also notice sometimes in those moments, like, okay, now is the time to eat, but I don't feel hungry. And so I actually struggle to sit there with a big meal and then kind of in a way force myself to eat. So I would just generally get like a juice or something or some like nuts or some fruit. So I'm still getting food into me, but allow the awareness and the sensations come back into my body and then be like, okay, look, I need to eat some more food. But I'd love, your experience in this space of what I've just shared and kind of like a bit of an understanding behind how and why this comes up within our bodies with the ADHD as well and the relationship to food.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as a psychologist and working with people with neurodiversity, so like we say like ADHD or autism or neurodiversity is really, really broad. So maybe you don't necessarily have a diagnosis of either of those. It could just be that you have sensory processing issues, or you think like it's just diversion in the brain. Neurodiversity is brain that's like the brain is diverse. It's not a typical pathway. And so when you think about like that, neurodiversity, right? We have a different way of thinking about things. So maybe someone neurotypical might think, I've got this and I land it this way. like it's just a linear path, but somebody with like neurodiversity, such as ADHD, arrives at the same location, but it takes twists and turns and tops and turns, right? But we both arrive at the same space. We just look at it differently. So if you think about food and eating in its traditional model of, we sit at the dinner table, we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have these certain foods that are kind of allocated to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We sit at the dining table, we use cutlery, and we share a meal with people. That's a really traditional concept of eating and food, and that we have to have a meal, and breakfast is most important, right? All of these really typical, neurotypical responses to food and eating behavior. But somebody with neurodiversity might be sitting there questioning it, being like, one, like, why? Like, this is either like, sitting at a dinner, for example, I'd have clients that would say sitting at a dinner table around people eating dinner is so overstimulating to me. I find it overwhelming to listen to everyone talking, and I'm like hyper aware of everyone's chewing sounds or the cutlery banging, and I find it really I find it overwhelming and overstimulating. I'm like got sensory overload in this position. And then I've also got the flip side of a client, for example, with ADHD, like you just mentioned, Katie, about the whole like setting alarms has been a strategy that we've had to implement about them eating food, because they get really lost in the like whatever they're doing in terms of getting super fixated on something that they're really passionate about, and they go into hyper focus mode and can be hours and hours, and they don't even realize, and it's not necessarily because they're like working themselves to the ground. They're genuinely so focused on it that simply they forget to eat, and they don't have that physiological arousals in their body, like the hunger and the fullness cue, or the hunger, really, ghrelin. That's the hormone that's really, really loud. It's not as loud in somebody with ADHD, for example. So these are all like real like factors coming into play with someone that has a neurodiverse brain. So that level of body awareness, for example, is something that needs to be upskilled in somebody potentially with ADHD, right? Because they're more likely to be impulsive, they're more likely to forget like executive functioning things. So like, oh, I forgot that it's dinner time and I need to eat dinner. But I like you had this strategy of like, even though I don't feel like food, but I know it's important, just having really simple strategies, like things that are easy to consume for me to get me through in terms of like energetically. So you're having like fruit and nuts or something like that. And there isn't something that's really come up a lot is people trying to bestow what is like traditional models of breakfast, lunch, dinner. So I'm sure there has been somebody in your lifetime that said, oh, well, having some fruit and nuts and some like a smoothie is not lunch. You have to eat something normal, Katie. Like you have to eat a proper meal, right? But what is a proper meal, right? Like what is, when we look at neurodiversity and disordered eating, and I don't really want to call it an ED, but when we look at that, or sensory issues around food, we have to kind of take a step back to like that neurotypical response to what food is and how to eat, or how to eat. It's like overall, the most important thing is that food is getting consumed, regardless of how it's happening, right? Because it's better than having zero. I feel like I went a roundabout way about explaining that, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And you said something like, so I know that I don't feel hungry a lot of the time. And so that's like, coming into the body awareness. Is there like what is kind of like the reasonings of the understanding for my logical brain to understand in the ways it's like why I don't feel that, like I don't feel hunger as such?
So many factors. I think that, and it's really going to be case by case. It's really individualized. I think neurodiversity can also get and I'm going to continue using the term neurodiversity to just cover all like ADHD, ASD, anything above that, because it can cover a lot. But it's often people, whilst we like the label of having like a diagnosis because it gives us understanding, even within that diagnosis, each individual, the way that they view the world can be slightly different. So each person, there isn't just like one treatment response, if that makes sense. just like each individual is different, right? So how you respond and how I respond to the same stimulus might be so different. So a few things could be going on though. And some things that are typical that I might see in like a clinical setting would be like if they have physiologically like a sensory processing issue. So either they don't get stimulated enough by sensory things in their body. So I'll give you an example of someone that feels like they could eat and eat and they don't feel fullness until it feels physically sick, because they have that lack of sensory awareness in their body. So it could be something like that, whatever hunger feels like typically to somebody, like, the gurgling in the tummy or like feeling lightheaded or whatever hunger feels like to you, those sensory things happening internally may not be as prominent or as effective as somebody that's neurotypical, right? That'd be one thing. The other thing is honestly the hyperfixation and the hyperfocusing, because your brain is oftentimes there's lots of things going on at the same time. And so it's hard to focus on one thing. But then when we are laser focused on one thing, that it is only the one thing. So it's hard for us to differentiate and think, oh, I've got these other body processes that I need to tend to, such as eating. So that could be another one. And then lastly, I can't discount if people are medicated, for example. That's like a really strong side effect is like appetite suppression on a lot of ADHD or stimulant medication. So I can't discount that is something that comes up clinically, that people are feeling like during the whole day, I literally feel like I have to force feed if I want to eat, because it feels like I'd be sick if I was going to eat on these medications. So just a few things at play. But like I said, every person is super individual, and it's really about really understanding yourself, maybe going to see someone that's got a bit more like professional support in terms of like getting you to understand what's actually happening internally for you. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I've obviously gone through the ADHD journey, and I'm a very sensual person and I feel a lot. But also I like the sensation play. I like to feel on and in my body. But it's only really now like the food part is coming up, and either in like intimacy and pleasure, I'm quite funny with too many bodily fluids in the bedroom, or like, if there's too much sweat on me when I'm having sex or something, I need to like wash it off. And like I'll be in
Yep.
swingers parties and I'll be engaging and like I need to wash it off. And so I'm very conscious around that. But I guess it's only recently in the past couple of months that the awareness that I have for myself as coming in around the food. So I've started kind of like, in a way, consciously, but also forcing myself in a way to be like, okay, Katie, we're going to the food shop now and we're going to go and see what new foods I can get. So, okay, like, let's say I had some coconut yogurt. It's like, okay, I've got some apple and some pumpkin and some seeds and some grapes to put on that. And I'm having more of a nutritious nutrition that's coming into my food, because this is what I'm choosing. Because previously, the relationship that I had to food was like, as a professional athlete, I need to eat this many carbs, I need to eat this much protein, and I just need to eat. And then that was in my brain, was wired like that. I was like, okay, this is what you do. But now, like, coming into this, I guess it's also stepping into like abundance and love and, caring for my body on that level of like, oh, food is nourishment. Food is a beautiful food. Food is exciting. And something that comes up to me as well, like I always go to the same restaurants for food. I'll always buy the same things. And so now, because I live in Asia, I often eat out. And so I've got this thing of like, maybe not every day, but at least 2 or 3 times a week, that I will force myself to go to a different restaurant to try different food. So like I'm awakening those senses within my body. And I did it the other day, and I went to this new restaurant and I just had this new food, and I was sitting there and I was so like, this is the reason why I go to the same place, because I didn't like the food. And I'm like, in that aspect, look, it's good to play with it and to try. But then I know, look, I know I like this food. I know I'm gonna eat it. I know I've got that nutrition in myself. I just rather have more of that. Then, obviously I ate the food, but I was like, wasn't a cool experience. Like I probably preferred the soda water, actually, the food I was eating, like And but it's just bringing the awareness around to that. So I really found so much value in what you've shared in relationship to um I guess the science and the logic behind the happenings of food in our body, because I come from more of the pleasure aspect, so I'm all about getting your chocolate and strawberries and essentially eating the chocolate covered strawberries, or putting chocolate on your body and having your partner lick it off, very in that pleasurable aspect of food, because that's the space that I'm in. But I love like the angle that you've brought it in for. And I guess like on the flip side, so we have someone who like myself who would probably undereat, or when the anxiety is there, or when the feelings, I'm more of an undereater. And then we also have like, and also yourself, the overeater, or the eating for comfort. And what would you say kind of that is? Because I know my partner was, when if we'd have an argument, I would be the one under eating and he would be the one overeating. So it's like kind of turning for comfort. So maybe there's listeners out there as well, on that flip side, what would you suggest for those who do notice that they are just eating for comfort or emotionally eating?
Emotional eating is something that comes up a lot. And I want to preface this by saying, like you just worded so beautifully, Katie, around food also being pleasure and food being not just fuel. And food can be exploratory, it can be fun, it can be a social gathering piece, it can be something that you get pleasure from. So you can see how naturally, when we have that mindset, which is amazing, we can also put two and two together when we're having like a time where we're feeling not emotionally like positive, we're having negative emotions or really big experiences, that we can go, oh, I know something that makes me feel good. And we know that we've got this learned script that food does make us feel good. And so often the emotional eating, there's so many aspects of this, but I guess something that's really common with emotional eaters, and maybe a lot of listeners would relate to, is often when we look at the root cause of emotional eating, it's a self-soothing tactic. So if we haven't had our needs met from like a soothing point of view, and if we have grown up often the trajectory is, if we've grown up in a childhood or a lifetime where we felt that we didn't get that same like loving emotional support, for example, and we've had to turn to some kind of means to self-soothe, sometimes food becomes that self-soothing strategy. And that can also be a learned behavior. So if you grew up and you witnessed people doing that in your home, if you found that it's always been something around you where food has been celebrated as something that is like, oh, it's always good, and it's that's the thing that gives me pleasure, then that's how we learn that that is the pleasure source. So self-soothing tactic, being really aware of triggers is the big one. Okay, so we always think of things as functions of behavior. And when someone's got an emotional eating, like they notice that they're doing that, it's going, okay, well, firstly, what is the things that are triggering me the most? And being really aware of like situation, context around the situation, and how you're eating. So a prime example would be something like, let's say, for example, you and your partner having a conflict. And, the questions that I'd be asking your partner is, like, is this always when it's a conflict in a relationship, or is it happening in other aspects? Is this happening mostly at home? Are you overeating or emotional eating just in the home space? Are you doing it in private, or other people witnessing it? And what are the emotions that are coming up for you? Because emotional eating is not just necessarily when we're sad or we're angry or we're overwhelmed or anxious. It can be when we're bored, when we feel understimulated, even when we feel happy, right? We use food as a reward, right? So emotional eating does, like, that's all emotional eating. So and not to discount that food is also pleasure and fun and happiness, and it does give us that dopamine hit. It's primary sources that we feed ourselves, and then we get a dopamine hit, and that's what we're looking for. But being like, I guess, understanding your triggers, knowing that it's really like, what is the function of this? Am I trying to soothe myself by using food? And then breaking that cycle can take some time, and it has to take quite a like tailored, personalized approach, where I'd recommend just really being, if you don't get professional support, I mean, really being aware of like, it comes down to self-awareness, right? It comes down to like, hey, what am I doing and what things can I replace this behavior with that also help me self-soothe? That's a band-aid, but also like underneath that, what is the thing that continues to trigger me? Is it something like I've got really big anxiety about XYZ? Well, we really need to be treating the anxiety, not necessarily the emotional eating. So hopefully that gives a kind of well-rounded view about emotional eating in general. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've really appreciated the chat and all the lessons. My brain is just like ping ping ping, like yeah, it's got to get like understanding. And actually what I'm seeing is like, we all approach things in different ways. We all have our own ways of navigating things. And because pleasure is one of mine, like extra taking it, I'm going to take it that extra step more and really like, okay, what food have I not tried? Obviously, I live in Asia that I have access to Mexican, Italian, Indian, Spanish. I have access to everything because it's like, what have I not tried before? And what potentially could lead me to more pleasure within this food. And I'm not someone who is an emotional eater or a comfort eater. So I know like this is a treat for me. This is a treat. Be like, oh, I'm just going to go out and try this and try it simply for my pleasure and for the enjoyment and for the nourishment of myself. And yeah, I'm actually looking forward to this kind of like exciting journey. And I know to wrap it up into there is like I know a lot of women do navigate the uncomfortabilities of food and all of this and maybe harden themselves or shame themselves, put themselves down. What do you suggest for women maybe, at this moment in their life, they are struggling with undereating or they're struggling with overeating or comfort eating or they're struggling with their weight? What like self-compassion or self-love could you suggest for those women who are navigating that at this moment in life?
Oh, I love that you framed it the way that you just framed it about like giving yourself a level of self-compassion and self-love in a space where we're often very hard on ourselves, right? So we become really hard on ourselves and feel like failures because we emotionally ate or we overate or we became so hard on ourselves because we want to manipulate our body size to be a certain way and we feel like we need to take extreme measures to do that. And I think one of the biggest reframes that I offer a lot of my clients when I work in this space is looking at all of those behaviors and those thoughts as not necessarily negative parts of you or things that are flaws or pathological. We look at them as how has this served, like we almost, every thought that we have or feeling or behavior in some way we use that as a protector. What is it trying to protect me from? And when I look at that reframe, you can offer yourself a bit of compassion about why. So for example, let's say someone that is overeating and is comfort eating and it goes, well, if I, rather than being really hard on myself and be like, I'm such a failure for doing this, I am always like, I can't seem to control myself, I feel so out of control around food. The reframe I'm trying to ask is, well, how is this trying to protect me from something? And often that will, we can dig a bit deeper because of that. And we go, well, actually, I've always, for example, I use this as a client that a client that I've had in the past would say, well, I've used food to soothe before because I went through like sexual abuse and trauma. And for me, it was something that was comforting in a time when I felt really out of control in my home environment, for example. And so we can go, whoa, like, well, firstly, have a little bit of self-compassion for you because you are just trying to protect you. But now that this situation is gone and we've dealt with it, know that we have other ways to help and protect ourselves. Can we respect our bodies in a way that will help us to feel nourished rather than to feel like we have to self-soothe with food? Is there other ways that we can find soothing and protect ourselves in different ways? So that's the first reframe that we offer, is that everything is a protector in some way. What is it trying to help us with, right? Not to say that we want to keep that behavior, but to understand it and to go, hey, like have a bit of compassion for you first. So
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting. You obviously know the angles. There's so many different angles that we approach. And from my personal experience, in my younger years, I deprived myself of pleasure. Like I didn't know what pleasure is. My body was completely switched off. I was numb. I didn't know how to feel the sensations of pleasure. And I guess obviously nourishment as food and food. So that's kind
Yeah.
of like the angle I've come at it is. It's like I missed out on so much, and I'm bringing that back in. Is exactly why I have the School of Sensuality. My pleasure coaching is all just simply for pleasure, and that doesn't always have to be, it's not just always in the bedroom, it's always just sex. It can be in any, it can be like getting your most favorite fruits or the most favorite chocolate and just like sensually eating them and having that pleasurable experience and actually giving yourself this enjoyment and the nourishment as well. Yeah,
I
I'm
love
actually I've taken quite a bit out of this our chat today. Thank you so much.
it.
I'm really looking forward to implementing and noticing more within my body. It's like, okay, what I know I need to eat. Maybe I am a little bit hungry, and can I just support myself more on that process and take it as like, okay, Katie, you are a pleasure queen. I am here for the pleasure, so I'm going to take more of that in. Thank you.
100%.
Thank you.
I love that. Thank
Yay.
you. So
So if anyone has got any questions after you've been watching or listening, feel free to pop them in below. I'm going to pop all Joe's links as well. Whether you are or someone or your partner, brother, sister, whoever is navigating food issues, we can always come and learn and grow and evolve that. And look, I myself am actually doing the same thing as well. We're all evolving, growing, learning new things. Maybe I start liking some like I don't know, Japanese food next, you never know. So it's all good. It's the
oh,
curiosity and
curiosity. Yeah.
the
I love that.
explorations that I love taking in. So thank you so much for your wisdom and your learnings today. I'm really, really grateful.